My granddad came here in 1909, and he came here because he had an aunt living here whose husband, Jim McLean, had a farm up Seabird Island on the west side of the sloughs. He also had a roadhouse in Huntington. My granddad went to work at the experimental farm as a teamster and lived in the house right at the end of the farm road they just took down a couple of years ago. It belonged to the farm, and my dad and my uncle were both born there when they lived there. And then what he did from there, like he sharecropped on property around here, and then ended up at Seabird Island when McLean and his aunt died, and she died in 1928. And McLean died in, he died in 1928. She died in 1932. He was born in 1834 in Nova Scotia, and they're both buried up in the old cemetery. And then basically my granddad took the farm over, and then my dad, he had two sons, my dad and my uncle, and after they dredged Sumas Lake, my dad ended up buying the work boats and put them in Hicks Lake, that's above Seabird Island, and rented them out and had pack horses. He and a couple other guys went to Princeton and bought horses from the natives there that caught them, and then they'd bring them back down and break them and then make saddle horses out of them and pack horses. And then Dad got married to my mother in 1932. They lived out on Scott Road, it is now, in the old Bennyworth place. Whiskers McCrae had built the house. And then my brother was born there, and then Dad rented 20 acres from Herb Young up Seabird Island on Chaplin Road, and that's where my sister and I was born. And I was born in 36, my sister in 34. So consequently, that's how we became Seabird Island people. But it was right at the end of Chaplin Road, and then Bert Horwell's place, who was the local blacksmith, when he died, my dad bought it. It was just across the slough. It was 21 acres, and he paid $650 for it with a house on it. And that's basically where we lived until I moved off the island. We grew up, I didn't know any kids in Agassiz. Seabird Island, or Wall Each, was kind of its own place. It was, you're kind of on your own there more. It was kind of, the native people were our friends. I didn't know there was a difference between native kids and white kids until I went to school, and the school bus used to pick us up, but they couldn't ride with, the native kids couldn't ride in our bus. So when I went to the school in Agassiz, I asked, like, where's all my friends? And I didn't really have a good time there because I was kind of you'd probably say a hillbilly to the town. Seabird Island, in the wintertime, we trapped, my brother and me trapped, and we basically lived off the slough. Like, there was fish just about year round, and we basically Mum had 3 milk cows, so we had milk, and we really didn't have to come to town that much, because when we did go to town, we walked when we were kids or rode our bikes. And then as after the war and whatnot, then things started to pick up. But starting on the flood of 48, that was the next big crisis we run into. When we were at school, we were all taken down to the foot of the mountain road because they needed kids for sandbagging. And we're down at the pump house at the foot of the mountain road. And we were there for a couple of days, and we ended up losing ground. You couldn't stay ahead of the water, was coming too fast. So they finally pulled us out of there, and Ernie Olson came. He was a foreman, said, "You got to get out of here, it's broke through." So Reuben Hogg gave us a ride toward back to Agassiz, but I had left my bike on Limburg Road because we went there on our own. We had to get down there, so my bike ended up on Muirhead's milk stand through the flood, and then walking, it would be in front of Sylvia Pranger's old place right off Pioneer. There's a culvert goes under the railway there, and we didn't really realize anything was wrong until the water was about 3 feet higher on the riverside than the upper side of the railway, and it was boiling through that culvert and digging just a great big trench, but it was shooting in the air. It was unreal to see. So we kind of hurried across the railway track because it looked like it was going to blow out, which it did after. And then on our way home, there was no water in Agassiz yet in the streets. But as I went home, we went up the track, of course. That's how we used to go. It's the shortest way. All the dips were full, and when you look over at Trammer Road and that, you could see that was starting to be a lake. And then I went on the Seabird Road. There was no Hague Road then. It was just a railway track, went to Hague without the Hague Road. So I went up Seabird Road or Walleach Road, and then it was fine. It was high ground there, like we had always been told by old Harry Joseph, the chief, and Jimmy Andrews, the old people from Seabird. You never had to worry up here in the flood because in '94 they were high and dry. So basically, other than the dips and the slough, it was fine. So anyway, as I made my way home, we had to wade through the dips. They were full of water, but it was clean water, it didn't matter. So then when we got home, our bridge, which they were wood bridges, there were 3 wood bridges on Mariah Slough, and the bridge that's right at right where you go into their school and everything, there was a bridge across there, and it was called the Indian Bridge. And you can still see the piling in, when the low water, you can still see where it went. And then that's where Clearwater Slough starts, the slough that runs along towards the bridge. So anyway, the water was still lower than it, so it was still going. And Chaplain Bridge, where you go by Chaplain Road, it was still good. But when we got to our place, the end of our bridge was floating. It reminded you of a wharf because the one end was tied to the road, but the other end we were about 3 feet above our driveway. And then, but that really, it had done that before. So basically, we waded home, and I had a canoe there anyway, a little canoe, and we just ended up using it. And then my dad was working at Hilltop Logging, which is by Hicks Lake. It's the old, where the park is now. But so he came home that night, and he came from the camp through Hicks Lake down the trail and came home, and he got the team of horses we had and the 3 cows, and the cows were pretty grim getting them on the bridge. So we had to swim them over to the bank, and they got up on the bank. But the horses, they made the lunge from the ground or water up to the end of the bridge, which was pretty good, and he had harness on him and everything. And we walked everything. Then they made us, they got the order from Agassiz, from Red Cross, I think. You had to move up to Camp Brewed. And as the old native told us, you're nuts, you don't have to go there. It's not, you're not going to get wet where you are. Anyway, we had 12 feet at the highest water of freeboard. But anyway, we went up there, and there was a bunch of natives up there they had, and then we basically moved up there during the flood. A few things happened, like we got boats from Harrison Hot Springs, clinker built putt-putts, that's what we called them. They had the little brigs in them. And there was 3 of them up there. We had them to use, and I had my canoe, and there were 3 native families. They had canoes, so we really, it was good going. Some of the highlights was about a week after the flood started, when we were up there, Candelina flying boat, like a cancel, 2-engine cancel, them funny looking flying boat. He came up the valley and buzzed the engine over where we were, like you could see where people were at Wall Each or Camp Road, and flashed his landing light and whatnot. But I think he probably looked at the slough, and it wouldn't be safe to land on because it was right full of driftwood and whatnot. So as it was anyway, he made a couple of passes, and then I have to laugh about it because it was quite a joke. He went in behind Darcy Morrow's farm, and this big box thing came out of the belly, well, it'd be out of the bomb doors of it, and hit the ground, and all these black things went flying, and he just tipped his wings and headed back down the slough. And then when people went over there, they had dumped a whole great big box full of number 12 red diamond hip gum boots. And I guess they thought, well, it's a flood, so everybody needs gum boots. Well, those boots were around Seabird Island for years. Most of them got cut off and were used as slippers, but it's just the way it goes. And I believe they dumped tents in Agassiz, but we didn't get any tents. We had enough buildings up there to live in. So it was quite a joke there when every native in Seabird Island had 12, number 12s, and most people have smaller feet than that, but they wore them anyway. It was just the funny things that happened. And then we went every day down the railroad track. You could go from Camp Road out Wall Each Road to the railway track, and then 2 teams of horses, Beatons and Merle Edmondson had a team. So they took the milk down the railway track to the bridge, the iron bridge, it's well, a meat market is, and there was a salmon packer, a Salmon Queen by name. It was about a 40-foot long boat. It took the milk and took everything. If you had to go to Chilliwack, that's how you went. And then it made trips steady there. There was like 2, a deckhand and a mate and the skipper, but that boat tied up at the steel bridge, iron bridge. That's what we used to call that bridge. It's still there. The railway still used it. Mm-hmm. And then that was basically our transportation. But we went to town every day, and above my wife's parents' old store, which is across from the museum, it's a trading post, I think they call it now. On the upper floor was the IOF hall, and the Red Cross had like living quarters for a lot of guys that had stayed, and all the good food there. We get fed every lunch. My granddad was one of the cooks, and to me it was just a big joke. But I was 12 years old, so that makes a difference. We didn't have too many worries.
From the time the worst of the flood began to when it really subsided, how long a period?
About 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
About 2 weeks, because the water broke into Agassiz on the 26th. The 24th of May, it had already, but it came fast. But most people knew it was coming because Prince George had it, and they say it's about 2 days to 2.5 days. If Prince George gets it, you're going to get it in that time. And it was just, without horses, it would have been harder there, but to me, it was just a big holiday. And there was, the track was washed out at Cats, and also just below Agassiz. So there was a train, and it was a work train, the steamer, and it was 2604. That was the number of it. And it used to go from the Salmon Queen, the Iron Bridge, back into Agassiz and haul whatever needed. And Buster Joe's wife, she was having a baby, and everything ordinary, they just had babies there, nobody panicked. It was all done at home, but anyway, they had to have her, she had to go to Chilliwack, and she never quite made it. I believe she had it in the station, and then they ended up at the Anglican church. But I knew the baby as Buster Joe Jr., and we've always laughed about it. I said, yeah, you're the guy that shut down the whole deal because they had to get your mom to Chilliwack, and it's always been quite a joke. It's the first time she ever had a baby other than in her own house. Quite a few, there were so many things then to me that was quite funny, and they had three-wheel speeders, and I don't know, they brought 2 up to the end at Walleach, like where Walleach is, and there was 1 in town, and we had a ball on them because when your chum was riding one and you're riding one, they rode, you pedaled them and pumped them, but if you put a rock out on the track that had the 1 wheel, you could derail them. We just had, it literally was a ball with them rigs, and you could scoot into town or back out. I don't know what they used them for, because they were just, I guess they were left there, and they were fair game. There was no end of kind of fun. There wasn't many kids in Agassiz because they had shipped them all out, but there were still a few up Seabird. It was like a holiday. Being that age, we had no worries. Nobody really did, because you were looked after, like there was lots of food. The Red Cross was good. And as I say, going to Agassiz every day, and that you could see how it was for some people. It was pretty tough, but where we were, it was nothing.